morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Wednesday, May 31st, 2017. I am Dave Biddle. Very happy to be joined by the people's champ himself, Matt Baxendell. Bax, simple question for you. Is there any hope Ohio State's going to have a go-to wide receiver when we look back on the 2017 season?
I mean, we have a ton of talent. My first reaction when you posed this question to me was, does Benjamin Victor grow up a little bit more and start getting it? Because clearly he has the talent. I could say the same thing about Paris Campbell. He looks the part right now, but do his hands work during real football games? I have to wait and see. Because if you told me Paris Campbell can catch the ball, then the answer is yes. And I'll feel way better about the entire situation. But bottom line is there's so much talent on this team for there not to be at least one or two or three really good receivers. You see the players that they have. You've seen what they were able to do in the spring game. And, yeah, every single one of them is a question mark. I can point out that, Johnny Dixon looked great, but his knees. I can point out Benjamin Victor has enormous amounts of talent, but was not remotely applying it in the spring, it looked like. You can talk about how Paris Campbell hasn't caught a cold in the last 2 years, but, whenever he gets the ball in his hands, he's amazing. I mean, there's so much to point out about the talent of this team. So I'm going to be optimistic like I usually am and say, yes, somebody's going to show up. I just am not sure who right now.
Yeah, I mean, KJ Hill has the most career receptions of any returning wide receiver. He has 18. 18 is what he had last year as a redshirt freshman. That's your leading returning receiver as far as wide receivers, not including Marcus Ball. And by the way, I saw a story recently that had Marcus Ball as one of the most indispensable players in the entire country. I'm like, what? That can't be right. That can't be right. But I digress. Maybe KJ Hill. I mean, if you squint really, really hard, can you see KJ Hill becoming a go-to receiver? I don't know if I can at this point.
Don't get me wrong. I don't want to knock the kid. I think he's got a good future. And, hey, with a real offense that doesn't call Mickey Mouse ninth grade football plays, he might be really good this year. I could say the same about Terry McLaurin, who I think is painted a little bit with the Urban loves his special team superstars brush and kind of ignores that Terry might be a really good receiver in his own right. I mean, but you're right. Like KJ Hill, I didn't know the number of catches he had in his career at the top of his head. I would have said like 12, And that's the problem we have is that this team has an unreal amount of talent. But none of it has any experience, or the experience that it does have is us remembering Paris Campbell fumbling against Virginia Tech 2 years ago. So it's not the kind of positive, look at that one crazy catch at some point in limited playing time kind of experience. So that's the problem we have. The plus side is, and I know there's some people who aren't going to like to hear this, but guess what? J.T. Barrett, his first year as a starting quarterback, had a completely inexperienced set of wide receivers who had virtually the same amount of experience as the guys we have right now. You had maybe one guy in Evan Spencer who had a little bit more run in him, but that was virtually it. And Devin Smith, all he did before that was run straight lines, right? So you've got a much better suited quarterback in J.T. Barrett to be able to handle a big, inexperienced group of receivers. The big question is which of these guys are going to step up and actually earn playing time, because that right now is our number one question mark. There's 4 or 5 other guys we haven't even mentioned in this conversation yet that could make an impact.
Let's just hope the go-to receiver steps up. I know they can do wide receiver by committee. You don't necessarily need a go-to receiver, but I'm of the belief you kind of do. I mean, if you're going to be an elite offense, not just a good offense, you need that guy that is your go-to receiver that you can count on in big moments that's going to make that catch. A Michael Jenkins on the 2002 team, Mr. Clutch Michael Jenkins. Really, there are 2 of them on the past national championship team with Devin Smith deep and Michael Thomas making plays all over the field. Hopefully I'm wrong and a go-to receiver will step up. I don't see it right now, but we'll see what happens. Hey, let's switch gears back and talk about the Buckeyes schedule this fall. It's an interesting schedule. I'll just go right through it. At Indiana, Oklahoma at home, Army at home, UNLV at home, at Rutgers, Maryland at home, at Nebraska, bye week, Penn State at home, at Iowa, Michigan State at home, Illinois at home, at Michigan. I see at least 5 games that could be tricky there when you look at Oklahoma, you look at Nebraska, Penn State, at Iowa, at Michigan. But overall, I don't think this is a daunting schedule. I think it's not easy. Where do you come down on this schedule? What do you make of it?
This is a cakewalk compared to last year. I mean, let's be real.
Yeah.
This is schedule. This is a big boy football schedule. It is a good out-of-conference schedule. And it's the first time I can remember Ohio State starting with the Big Ten game. But compared to last year, this is like manna falling from heaven, you know? There's no back to Wisconsin and Penn State thrown in there. You know, the Badgers aren't even on the rotation this year. Does anybody fear going to Nebraska with this team? I don't. Does anybody fear going to Iowa, where the Fighting Kirk Ferences are going to run the ball up the middle in that Dave play that Bowman loves so much 34 times in a row? So, yeah, there's some good teams on this schedule. But unlike last year, Oklahoma is coming to the shoe, right? And as the Arkansas State Police proved, Baker Mayfield isn't that elusive, right? Then you've got Penn State, not at Penn State at night, like it always is, but in the horseshoe. And it'll be our night crowd, right? That's a big edge. And then, hey, end of the year, you got the game. That's the biggest game of them all. We all know it, right? But Jim Harbaugh's replacing 18 or 17 or 16 or whatever starters it is. And to be real honest, I think that team's in for a bit of a regression after the last couple of years. Everybody's talking about how big of a game Michigan State is. Well, hell, those guys went 3-9 last year, right? I expect them to be better. Everybody expects them to be better. But what happens if this whole, sectional off the field stuff turns out to be a real problem for D'Antonio? What happens if all those other rumors turn out to be a real problem? What happens if they're just not that good right now because a program like Michigan State isn't structurally built to be able to win 10 games every year? That's all of a sudden not that intimidating of a game. And then we're talking about beating Oklahoma early, beating Penn State at home, and winning at Michigan, which sounds a heck of a lot like last year with a lot easier venues and a lot more experienced team. So, yeah, it's a hard schedule. I mean, good Lord, I'd love to play in the Big 10 or Big 12 versus the Big 10 right now. But the truth of the matter is, they played a lot harder schedule last year. Last year, I thought they might lose a game because of that road schedule. That was what I said at the start of the year was 11-1, and hey, that's what happened, right? You know me, Bids. I'm like Mr. Bucknuts. I have a lot of trouble picking the Buckeyes to lose a game because they're always better, right? This year, there's no built-in structural, hey, they got to go 2 straight road games with Wisconsin and Penn State back-to-back or something crazy like that. You don't have 3 road night games against top 10 teams in your first 6 or 7 games this year. This is a much easier schedule with a much more veteran Buckeye team. Ergo, I think they're going to be much better suited to run through it.
Very well said, and among the many hats that you wear, you do a bit of ticket brokerage on the side, and I'm curious to get your take on this. Obviously, the 2, primo home games this year for the Buckeyes, Oklahoma, Penn State. We know Oklahoma's going to be a night game. We know Penn State's going to be a night game, too, even though it hasn't been officially announced. Give me your idea, assuming Penn State is what we think they'll be when October 28th rolls around, and assuming Oklahoma doesn't lose their opener this year, what do you think will be the ticket that is hardest to get, that will be the highest price, and what do you think the average ticket will be going for in the secondary market? They're around 100, so the tickets that are $100 for face value, what do you think they'll be going for Oklahoma and Penn State?
All right, so Oklahoma the cheapest ticket until like a couple hours before the game, because usually a couple hours before the game, people are just making sure they sell their tickets, so things dip a little bit. I assume Oklahoma, the cheapest ticket, which is called a quote-unquote get-in, you're looking at $250 to $300. That's, I think pretty standard for a game like this. I think there's a little bit of a luster in Oklahoma that's not as big as it could be, just because the Buckeyes drilled them last year. It's still a good game. And if you want good seats, I'm talking like B-deck when I talk about that, then I would say, you're looking at probably $250 to $300 for a good seat to get in. I think the game that's going to be the most valuable this year is going to be Penn State. I think that's a game that everybody's expecting those two teams are going to be, in a very good position to be competing for the Big Ten championship. The winner of that game probably wins the Big Ten. I think that's the game of the year. I think your cheapest ticket for that game is going to be $300. Almost certainly. And if you want good seats, you could see $400, $500, $600 for a good ADEX seat. That's pretty standard for OSU football right now, though. Like, that's not like, oh my God, this year is so expensive, But here's the other thing, the flip side. You want to go see the Buckeyes play a real football game? Go to the UNLV game. That's going to be one of the cheapest games of the last couple of years because they don't bring any fans with them. The students don't have to buy those tickets necessarily because it's the non-conference portion. That could be a ticket where you can get a ticket the day of the game for $80.
$80. I was going to say that could be a $10 ticket when if you're walking around the stadium like a half hour before the game. You might be able to get in the UNLV game for like $10.
guy in the lot with the ticket that may or may not be real, yeah, you can get one for $50. No question about it. Right? I'm
not talking about counterfeit tickets. I mean a real ticket. A real ticket for that kid. That could be a $10 a day.
It's his location. We all know how cheesy it can be out there with the guy with the I need tickets sign and a green visor, right? Like, you gotta be careful with those guys. Alright? Like, those are the ones, bro. But like, the guys who actually sell tickets for a living, who don't deal in fake tickets because it's horrible for business, will tell you, you're going to probably see UNLV good seats dropping under $100 day of. You know, if you want to lock them up now, they're probably going to be $1.25 or $1.30 for A-deck tickets. But that's really cheap for good seats for an OSU football game. And as we all know, the cheapest way to get into the horseshoe is to get a Buck ID right before you graduate and hold on to it for 12 years like I have and pretend you're a student. Because it's always cheaper.
You can pull that off. I still have my Buck ID, but I now have a gray beard, and I don't look like the 18-year-old somehow that is much skinnier and does not have a gray beard. So I can't get away with that. Plus, I'm in the press box anyway, but I digress. Great stuff, as always, from the People's Champ, Matt Baxendell. You can catch his column every Sunday. It is The Bucket. If you haven't read his column this past Sunday, make sure you read it. Fantastic column, as always. Might be even better than usual this time around. Give a nice tribute to Jim Tressel and everything that he did, looking back on that. And he gave a fantastic tribute to the men and women that have served our armed forces, with it being Memorial Day this past weekend. So make sure you check out The Bucket this past Sunday if you haven't already. So thanks again to Matt Baxendell. Really appreciate it, Bax. And thanks to all the listeners out there for tuning in to the show. Hope you have a great day. Let's hear some Buckeye swag. Best damn band in the land.